Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Brenda Dettinger from BioPack, and I'll be your moderator on today's webinar, AcqKnowledge Customization, Drag and Drop Automation with Workflow. This is a really cool feature, and if you don't know about it, you're gonna love learning about it today. And if you do know about it, you're gonna learn how to set it up today. We do have a very full presentation. I'm just gonna jump right into housekeeping here. If you have a question, please submit it through the GoToWebinar control panel. That's how you communicate with me, and I'll pass questions on to Fraser. If the webcam's turned on, if it looks small to you or too large, you can just resize it by grabbing that little gray bar there. The webinar is being recorded. We'll send each of you a link once it's processed. And finally, we'll have a survey at the end. Please complete it so we have your feedback and ideas. Now we have an excellent speaker today. Fraser Finlay is the CEO of BioPack. He has over 25 years of experience in the life sciences and physiology monitoring industry. Fraser oversees the development of physiological data collection and analysis products and is a well-regarded expert who presents in workshops all over the world. Welcome, Fraser.
Thank you, Brenda. Good morning, everybody.
All right, Fraser, let me make you presenter. One sec. All right, here you go.
Perfect. Get organized. Okay, well, thank you, Brenda, for the great introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar on AcqKnowledge Workflow. But before we start, a little background information about BioPack. BioPack develops high-quality scientific tools that allow you to measure physiology anytime, anywhere, with any subject. We've been in business for over 30 years, and 99% of the top 100 universities use BioPack products, and many corporations use our products for their research and development as well. And all of those users have helped to generate over 50,000 citations as of August of 2023, so over 50,000 citations now. So the purpose of the webinar today is to provide insight into the workflow tool. We released this about a year ago. It's a drag and drop automation tool that comes with the scripting license that is available for the AcqKnowledge software. This means you can essentially create your own scripts or use workflow to create your own automated routine. So if you've got scripting and you upgrade to Windows 5.0.8, you will see a new menu in the AcqKnowledge menu structure called Workflow. And if you're ordering or have recently ordered a new MP160 system and you elected to purchase the workflow license, you will see workflow and scripting, that the two come together. For those of you that like to script, then scripting is an amazing tool that allows you to have full control over the system. But if, like many people, you just want to create a quick way to automate certain tasks, then workflow is really very elegant, completely drag and drop, and it makes life a whole lot easier. Before we get into it, I've got a quick demo to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to switch screens now. I'll go over to AcqKnowledge. And right here, and let me open up something else. All right, so this is the workflow editor, and I'm going to open up the particular workflow. Here it is. So this workflow will operate on the graph that I've already opened. I'll just explain what this is. On the left-hand side, you can see the typical AcqKnowledge waveform. This is skin conductance level data, so from electrodermal activity. On the right-hand side, we've got the media function, which is this menu at the top here, showing you the media that was presented to the participant as this skin conductance level data was presented. And then layered on top of that, we've got these focus areas. So these three bars that you can see on the screen, the smoky gray color, these represent the points where different trailers, movie trailers, were presented. So if I click into any of these, I can play through the video, I can play it back and see exactly what the person was looking at as they were responding to that part of the movie. So it's time synchronized movie trailer to the actual signal itself. Now what this workflow will do, it will run through and perform the analysis for us. So I'm just going to hit play or hit run. And you can see that AcqKnowledge is doing a bunch of different things in the background here. And I'll walk you through that in a moment. Okay, perfect. Okay, so what AcqKnowledge did in this case, or what the workflow did, it duplicated the skin conductance level channel, and we've got this second channel in here. We then used a filter to filter the signal, not that it really needed it. We then run the electrodermal analysis. So this is identifying the skin conductance responses within the skin conductance level data. It's marking them with these water drops. You can see them here and here and here. There's a couple of them in there. And it created this phasic waveform. And then also it created an Excel spreadsheet that looked within the focus areas. So this was the first movie trailer, the Luck movie, little cartoon. It went through 10-second chunks of that file looking to count the number of skin conductance responses. And as we look, we can see there are no skin conductance responses, so this column is all 0. The second movie trailer was called The Reef, and there were a couple of responses there. And then the Banshee, there was 1 response. So all of that was done in a fully automated fashion using the workflow tool. So let's get a little more detail on that. I'm going to come back into my presentation. Minimize these down. All right. So with the workflow, you basically have full control over any of the menu items within AcqKnowledge. So for those of you that use the Find Cycle Detector, you have full access to that. You can tease out event marks, you can apply event marks, you can operate just over the focus areas, just as we've seen. You have what we call channel management, so you can duplicate waveforms, you can add new labels, you can change the display, you can turn channels on and off. You can take measurements using either the fine cycle peak detector or using the epoch analysis module. You have access to all the transformations, filtering, derivative smoothing, waveform math, etc. Any of the analysis routines that are within AcqKnowledge, so things like the heart rate variability, blood pressure, left ventricular pressure, the electrodermal that I just showed you, basically anything that is part of the existing menu structure can pretty much be used as an action item within one of the workflows. And then the advantage of creating the workflow, the example I just gave you was based on one file. You can extrapolate that out so that you can run over several files. So you could do 5 files back to back, and you'll have your preparation in terms of filtering or any other conditioning you're doing. You'll then have the scoring of the waveforms and then the measurements extracted for those 5 files. So it's pretty elegant in terms of standardizing what you're doing, because it's going to perform exactly the same task every single time it runs the workflow. It automates everything, obviously, which saves a lot of time. You can create these workflows and then you can share them with your team. So you can have different workflows for different types of analyses or different types of data preparation before you get to analysis. And then as long as your team don't go in there and modify the workflows then become like a standard operating procedure for that part of your protocol. This helps to reduce training time, because if you've got a technician that needs to go through and perform certain tasks, you can just train them on running the workflow, what the data should look like going in and what the data should look like coming out. And that simplifies having to train them on every single step. Like, they'll begin to understand what's going on, but it sort of definitely helps you speed the process up. Yeah, and of course you eliminate a lot of those frustrating tasks. Like if you've got 20 participant files and you just need to go in there and rename one of the files or duplicate it and rename it, that's a lot of files that you've got to open and touch. This will allow you to do that over all 20, and it will do it very, very efficiently. And of course, the big advantage over the scripting is that there's no programming. This is a graphical user interface. It's drag and drop, and makes it much, much easier. So finally, before we get into actually showing how to do this, these are the areas that I'm going to be focusing on today. We'll get into the user interface. I'll show you how to do some of the basics. And what I'm going to do is build out one of the workflows. I'll try and touch on most of these areas I've got identified here. So the rate calculation, the fine cycle, the EDA we already took a look at, but we'll get into that as well. The batch processing, and then some other tricks that can be used within the system. So hopefully that gives you a kind of an introduction of where I'm going to be taking us. At this point, I'm going to hand back over to Brenda for our first poll of the day.
Hello. All right, let me get this poll launched. This is a pretty easy one to answer. Do you have the workflow license yet? Yes or no? And the results are coming in. I don't have any questions yet, just so everybody knows. We do take questions throughout the webinar, so if there's anything that you want to ask about, I can ask them during the polls. And or maybe if it's like really relevant to what he's talking about, I might jump in and interrupt Fraser. So yeah, so it looks like we've got most people. So 3/4 of people do not have the workflow license. About 1/4 of the people do. So thank you all for participating. Let me go ahead and close this poll, and back to you, Fraser.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Brenda. Welcome back, everyone. So if you don't mind, I'm going to shut my camera down because I think this will make it a little bit easier for you guys to view what's going on screen. And now I'm going to start. So this is a workflow blank. I'll go through the user interface. The way the workflow user interface works, it's sort of divided into 2 primary areas. This is where we're going to create our workflow. On the left, we have what we refer to the actions, and these are those menu items that appear within AcqKnowledge. And we're basically going to drag an item from the left and bring it over to the right and start constructing a simple workflow. First thing we need to do is get a file. So you can either ask the user to select a file, or you can operate on a file that's already opened. For this first example, I'm just going to use this option here, ask for files. You can use multiple file selection, so that would allow the user to open 3 files at once, for example, and then the software will perform whatever task on those 3 files. I'm going to select the location of the file that, or the folder that I want to use. So on my desktop up here, on my desktop, I've got, I'm going to use this folder here, and so the system will default to this folder. Hopefully I selected the right one. And the next thing we need to do is, once the user has selected the file, they need to tell the user to open it. Above the graph window here, there's this toolbar. This toolbar plays an important role. On the left-hand side, you can discard anything that you've done. Okay, I can open an existing workflow. I can save a workflow. So if I just move this back in, set this back up again. Okay, so now this is enabled. I can save this, give it a name. Then these options here, these are the classic play. So this is going to run the workflow from beginning to end. This option here is very handy. This will allow you to run step by step through your workflow. So I can click this item and it's taking me into this folder. And I can immediately see that I need to go up a level. So I'm going to close out. I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to go up to this folder here, and I'm going to select that folder, and we'll run that again. And now I can see the files that I'm interested in. And then I can pick a file. Actually, I'm going to use this one. Now, at the moment, nothing's happened. I need to now tell the software to open that file. So to do that, we've got this option here, graph management, and there's an option in here for open graphs. Let's drag that over. And now, whatever graphs have been selected here, the software will open them. Once I've done that, I can run. We'll select this file, open the next step, and it's now opened that file and I'll just drag it over. So now I've got my file to the point where I've opened a file. So pretty straightforward. I'm just going to close that out. So now we can start to do some different things. The first thing I like to do is I want to duplicate. Actually, let's just open that file so we can get a look and see what we're dealing with here. So this is just a single channel of ECG. I'm going to create a protocol for filtering, and then eventually we'll do some heart rate variability. We'll add a rate calculation, and we'll do some different things over this file. But when I'm doing filtering or making any changes, I like to duplicate the waveform. So if I come over to channel adjustments, there's a bunch of options here for controlling the channels. So first thing I want to do is duplicate my active channel. Well, I've only got one channel, so it's going to duplicate that channel. And then I can change the active channel. So change active channel, and I'm going to say change the active channel to anything with index of 2. So that's the channel number. And if we come across here back into our file, this was channel 1, so when it duplicates it, it will give it an index of channel 2. That's the little channel number that appears adjacent to the graph window. So I'm now saying channel 2 will be my active channel. Now I'm going to rename that channel. There's an option here, rename active channel, and I can just put a label in, and for this, I'll just use ECG filtered as my label. So now I can identify the original from the duplicate. Then I'm going to come in and say, all right, if I'm performing a task in AcqKnowledge, I need to select an area of data, okay? And now whatever task is going to be performed over this area. So what I want to do is come in here and select change the selected area. And there are different options. You can select all the data in the graph, which is the default, a specific time range, or offset from the current cursor position. I want to select all of the data within that graph because I want to run the filter over the entire file. Once I've done that, I'm now at the point where I want to introduce a filter. So if we look on the left here, we can see digital filters, and I've got choices. I'm going to use a digital FIR filter. Just for the purposes of this webinar, I'll run a low pass filter, and I'm going to run it at 33 Hertz, and I'm just going to change this to optimized. So now what we've created is this pretty straightforward workflow that's going to open the file of choice. It will duplicate the channel, rename it, select all the data, and then apply a filter. So if I close this out, I hit play. Again, I'll use the same file. And you can see we've got a duplicated waveform down below, channel 2. And then I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this. This little icon down in the bottom right-hand corner, it's a little blue with an eye. And if I click on this, it tells me what's happened to this waveform. So this is telling me that I've run a low pass filter at 33 Hertz on this channel. Okay, so pretty straightforward so far. Nothing too advanced. Next thing I want to do is calculate the participant's heart rate. So to do that, I need to introduce the rate calculation. So again, this time I'm going to use my analysis menu. If I'm not sure where these menus are hidden, if I just go to the upper menu, I can type in up here, find, and it will give me the option I'm looking for. So this is find rate. I'm going to come down here and drop that down there. Now I can set the rate dialog up. So I want to calculate the rate in beats per minute. I'm going to use the QRS complex as the trigger for the rate calculation. I'm going to leave all of this as the default settings. And I'm just going to run this. And I move this over. Unfortunately, I've got two monitors and it keeps opening up on the other monitor. But anyway, you can see now that we've added the rate calculation down below. So now at this point, if that's all I wanted to do, I can just save this. Anytime anyone needs to perform this task, all they have to do is run this particular workflow. But let's take this a step forward from there. Now we've identified the rate, we'll go in there and start taking some measurements. So let's say we want to know the participant's heart rate at precise time intervals across the graph. Let's close this out. There's a couple of different ways in which you can do that. One of the easiest is to use the epoch analysis. Get rid of that search. If I come down here, let's see if we're looking, there it is, epoch analysis, can come down and drop this down at the bottom. Now, this brings up a good point. So we're doing now, the active channel is that rates channel. So what I need to do is make sure that I'm telling the software, what I need to do is make sure that the epoch analysis is running on the correct channel. So just to be very specific, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to say change my active channel, and I'm going to say change my active channel to a channel that contains the label rate. So now the software will perform an epoch analysis over this rate calculation. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, I'm going to use a 10-second window, and I'm going to use a fixed time interval without any gaps in between. So it'll start at the origin, and then it will just take 10-second chunks all the way across the recording. And I'm going to output my results to Excel. And now I can choose the measurements that I want to take. And I can choose, again, channels with the name containing rate. And I'm going to look for the maximum. Let's just make life easier for ourselves. We'll do minimum. And we will do peak to peak. So now we'll get the maximum heart rate for the 10-second period, the minimum, and then the difference between the two, the most minimum and the most maximum. So let's give this a go. We'll run this again using that same file. And that's not the one we want. We'll close that one out, but this is the one we want. So this is the epoch analysis that we just ran, 10 seconds, the maximum heart rate, the minimum heart rate, and the peak to peak. The 0 here is because when we start the rate calculation, it takes a couple of heartbeats to start and then it jumps up. So don't be alarmed. It's not that our participants' heart stopped beating. That's just the way that first segment runs. So if you were doing any analysis, you'd probably start with the data further down. So, okay, so now we've layered on a little bit more where I just shut my, it just shut my workflow. Okay, so now we've just, oh no, I didn't, closed it. So now we've reached this point where we're starting to layer on a little bit of sophistication. So before we get too deep and to give everyone a chance to take a breather, I'm going to hand over to Brenda for our second poll of the day.
Okay, exciting stuff, Fraser, seeing those workflows work. So I'll go ahead and launch this poll. I see your question, Jenny. I will, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll automatically get a link tomorrow sometime with a recording, so you can drop off and do the thing that you have to do in Sweden, which is like, it's after 5 there, so 17:30. So yeah, no problem. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, meanwhile, we've got not very many people have started using workflow, so this is a great learning opportunity for you guys to get started. Definitely ask questions if you have any, so that we can address them in the webinar if something seems confusing, or if you want to go back over something at the end of the webinar, let us know. Fraser is happy to pop back in and go back. So, all right, great. Well, again, most people not started using it. I'm going to close the poll, Fraser, and back to you.
Okay, perfect. All right, one of the reasons for asking those polling questions, it kind of helps me know the pace I can go at and sort of what the level of explanation I need to go into. So hopefully I'm going at a pace that makes sense for people. So I'm going to maintain this same workflow. So that if you look on the left-hand side at the top of each action, as you add it in, it gives it a number. So now we've got 10 elements within this particular, within this particular workflow, but there's no real restriction. You can keep going. What I'm going to do now is say, okay, well, let's assume we want to perform some heart rate variability analysis over this ECG waveform, because this is a type of analysis that many of our customers like to perform. It's an important one, and this is a way in which you can automate sort of two elements of the process. One is preparing the data before you actually perform the analysis, and then secondly, automating the running of the analysis. Now, one thing that I always like to point out, BioPack doesn't sell black boxes, and this is not intended to create a black box system. When you're preparing your data for analysis, you really need to be looking to make sure that the data is good, it's clean, you've got sensible values, physiological values for the participant. And once you're satisfied that your data is ready for analysis, then you can advance on. And then any measurements that we're extracting from the data, again, you need to go through and look at those very carefully to make sure that they're reasonable for that particular participant. So don't just create a workflow, hit run, and take it for granted that everything is perfect. You still have to go in there and double check anything, check everything. So, okay, heart rate variability. I'm going to use the HRV statistical for this next portion. So after we've run the AcqKnowledge analysis, I can come into analysis and I can drop in HRV further up within the system if I want to. It doesn't have to be on the end. So if we come back in, we open the graph, we duplicated the channel, we changed the active channel to channel 2, we ran our filter here, we ran the filter over all the data, and then we calculated rate. So what I'm going to do is just drop the HRV analysis in here. So if I select HRV, there's HRV statistical, and I'm going to put that in right here. Now, the nice thing about this one is it allows you to select the channel that you're going to perform the analysis over. So I'm going to use channel 2. I'm going to perform the analysis over, I'll just use the default 10-second epochs from the beginning of the graph, but you've got options here. And then I'm going to output my results to Excel. And at this point, I'm going to I'm going to close. I think I have the graph open. So this analysis will be performed on channel 2 here. So I'm going to close this out, run it again. Oops, pick a channel, fell asleep. Here we go. Okay. So now if I come back in here, I can see that my rate calculation, I had changed channels. It's stuck to 2, so I need to go in there and correct that. But here, actually, let's just do that. We'll go back into our workflow and going to okay. So that will now ensure that this is running on channel 2, and I think that will work. I'm going to close this out. We'll just run it one more time, and I'll close these out. We'll just run it. Okay, so something I've got wrong here. Let's have a look. What am I doing wrong? Oh. So actually, this brings up a really important point. I use my scroll wheel to scroll, and if you happen to be within an active dialog, it will change your settings. So just go a little bit careful. So I'm going to make sure this is correct. So active channel is 2, rate beats per minute, positive. This should all run correctly now. Let's just give that one more go. Oh, yeah, and the other thing we're going to do is make sure that we're selecting all the data. So channel 2, select all the data. We'll run. We'll go. All right, so perfect. This worked out just the way it should. The heart rate variability analysis will go through and identify, I auto scale all my waveforms. We will identify the ECG complex, and it's using the QRS for the actual HRV analysis. If I come over, this was the epoch analysis that we ran, the 10-second epochs. And over here, this is the HRV analysis. So we selected 10 seconds, the root mean square of the successive differences, the standard deviation of the successive differences, and then the PN and 50% as well. And so again, I just used the default 10 seconds. So very quickly, we've been able to create a pretty advanced analysis routine that's performing a lot of these different tasks. And this is all done within that one workflow that we've been creating and layering on, you know, like building blocks, right? So once I've created that, I can just come in here and I can give this a label. And now anytime any of us want to use that, we just grab that, and this is configured, ready for a user based on our standardized graph settings. Now, the thing you need to remember, the system will always work based on where the expected channel is. Now, I showed you that by adding a label, you can choose the rate channel. So if you've got a situation where maybe you change the way your channels are configured a little bit, the best way to identify the channels is by the label, making sure that you identify by these rather than the index. So again, if we come back in here, when I was using the epoch analysis, I basically changed the active channel to the channel that had rate as in the label, and then it performed the analysis over that particular channel. Just makes it easier for you. As long as you know what the channel labels are, you won't have a problem there. Okay, so there's some other things that I want to take a look at and show you guys. Within this file, if you look, I've got some event marks at the top. And these event marks were added while the data was recorded. Just there are default event marks. So someone pushed one of our function keys and it added a marker, and they're labeled 1, 2, 1, and 2. Now, I showed you earlier the focus areas. You can create focus areas based off of event marks. So one thing I can come in and do is use the focus areas within this workflow. Oops, if I grab it, define between events, and I'll just, very original. So I'm going to look for an event type, which is default, but there's a lot of different event types within AcqKnowledge. The global event bar, and it must have a label of 1. And then the end of the focus area is going to be the second default event in the global events bar, and that will have a label of 2. So now when we run this, it will create the 2 focus areas. So let's just close this out. We'll run it again. It's still going. Okay, so now we can see we've added these two focus areas. By doing that, we can then select focus areas in any of our analyses options. So just for example, I'm not going to go in and show this. I think we all get the concept here. But for the HRV analysis, I could just choose to run the HRV within the focus area. In fact, why don't I just do that? I'm going to eliminate it from there. I'll eliminate this and I'll eliminate this. So we're back to how we were. We're going to run our filter. We'll run the rate. And then down at the very bottom, I'm going to change my active channel, and that will be channel 2. And I'm going to change the selected area, and I will use actually all the data in the graph, come back to HRV analysis, do statistical, and I'm going to do it on channel 2 and fix 10 seconds, and I'll do it just for the focus areas and export out to Excel. So now we'll do the same HRV analysis, but just within those focus areas. All right, so I come back over here. It's performed my analysis and it spat my results out for the, actually this was the previous one where I did everything, I think. Somewhere in here, I've got the correct, here we go. So this is for the smaller period from 43 seconds, and the other spreadsheets there as well. So that performed just over this first segment. So pretty easy to set up. This file was already opened. That's why I've got lots of different channels. So I'm going to close this out. Close this out. So that gives you an idea of how you can use the focus areas to perform your analysis. Easy to set that up. I mean, that gives you a pretty good idea. We've got one more poll, and then I've got a couple more things to show you. So I'm going to hand over to Brenda for our final poll.
Hey, all right, let me go ahead and launch this poll. Tell us more about the number of participants in your studies. I know that as you have multiple participants, the workflow tool really does help. And then Thomas asked a question. Is there a command to temporarily interrupt the workflow to look at something, for example, to look at the IBI InterB interval data midway through the workflow?
You can stop the workflow at any point using stop, but the best way, if you want that level of granularity, the best way is just to jump through doing it step by step, because when you stop it, it will pick back up from the beginning when you run it again. Like you can't re-automate it, if that makes sense.
Okay. sounds like you should go all the way through. All right, let's look at these numbers here. It's kind of almost evenly split, with a larger percentage of people, about a third, are the 0 to 25 range. And then the other groups are kind of split evenly amongst them. So, all right, great. Great information. Thanks everyone for sharing. Go ahead and close the poll, and then back to you, Fraser.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brenda. Thanks everyone for participating. Okay, so I've got another workflow here, and I'm just going to open, I'm just going to run it. Let's see how this one works. It gets into the find cycles, and I'll explain what we can do there. So let me find that same file. It's an easy one to work with. Let me move this across. Adjust this. So it's that exact same waveform, and I'm going to adjust this a little bit so you can see what's going on a little better maybe. So it's selecting the channel. It then ran through the find cycle peak detector, and it placed the QRS. So I'm going to show you how it did that. Again, if you're familiar with AcqKnowledge and you're familiar with using the find cycle peak detector, this is probably one of the most powerful tools within AcqKnowledge. And I'm going to stop at this point. This allows us to identify a waveform. So here I've elected to identify the S portion of the QRS, and I'm going from one S wave to the next, and I'm identifying the peak, and then I'm using events, and I'm placing a QRS label, QRS peak label on channel 1. And if I move over here and we zoom in, you can see that what the software is doing. If I were to do this manually, I'm selecting from here to here on the bottom on my S wave. And actually, that's not a good example. I need to zoom in a little bit more. Zoom in so you get a better view. There we go. So if I select from my S wave over here to my S wave over here, I'm always guaranteed to get the R wave within that and ignore this R wave because the S comes after the R. This allows me to identify each of these very easily. And then the software can either place the event mark on the signal itself or in the global event mark bar up above. And if we come over to this events, we're saying at the maximum point on channel 1, output a QRS peak event and place it on channel 1. Okay, but that could be on the global event bar, on an active channel. I mean, you've got choices for where you place that label. I elected to put it straight on the waveform because it makes more sense for this. Now, following on from there, we can then do use the find cycles again, and we can take some measurements and output a new channel, which would be the R to R interval. So what I'm going to do is just close this out. We'll just run it right from the top one more time. I didn't set this, did I? All right. Okay, so the first find cycle peak went through and identified the QRS. I ran it a second time and asked to take a measurement, which is the interval from the one QRS to the next. So this is my R to R tachogram. So then I can eyeball this and make sure that my data is in the physiological range before I perform any HRV analysis. The find cycle was really, really excellent for teasing pieces out and labeling and extracting measurements, just the way we did it there. And if you're unfamiliar with the find cycle peak detector, if you go onto our YouTube channel, there's 5 or 6 screencasts that work all the way through all the features of the find cycle peak detector, from just basic introduction to the user interface all the way through to plotting 3D signals. Okay, so I got another one. This is one that comes up periodically, which is a useful one. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to open up another existing web workflow. Here we go. And I'm going to just jump in. This is working. This is a good example. So this one will not ask the user to open a file. This assumes that the file is already opened. So when we come into file management, there's an option here, get graph files or get top graph. And sorry, here it is, get top graph. That assumes that you've already got a file open. So what I'm going to do is open the appropriate file. Multiple people, here we go. So for those of you that collect data from multiple subjects at the same time when they're receiving the same data, in this case, we've got a number of participants. They're receiving some form of stimulation. There's an event mark put in there at the point that the stimulus was presented to the participant. And then I can minimize this. And then what the workflow will do, it will give the mean, it will create a new channel of the average of all of these. And then the find cycle peak detector will identify that particular event, and then we'll use the epoch to take a measurement around that point. So this is using the expression calculation. So we're adding all the channels and then just dividing by the total number, and then we're going to create a new graph. So I can probably just step through this one. Move this across, there we go. So we've got an active graph here. It's going to select all the data. It's now created this new channel over here. And now we should be, there we go. We've performed the first peak, find cycle peak, and then we've got the values within a 15-second period. I think that's how this was set up. Let's have a look. Oh, I hadn't finished. Sorry, let me continue running this through. All right. Okay, so that was it. So in the find cycle, we looked for the stimulus, or the software looked for the stimulus delivery, which was that event mark here. It selected a 10-second period, which you can now see highlighted. And then it outputs the minimum, the maximum, the delta, and then the delta time. And if I come into Excel, those are the measures on the mean channel. So these are the results just from that mean waveform. And then the epoch analysis, I come down here, looked at 10-second bins. Looks like we just measured off of channel 1, but we could measure off of all the channels or just the mean. And then we looked at the minimum, the maximum, the delta, and the delta time. So it's easy to kind of calculate the mean, group mean, and then take a quick measurement from it as well. So lots of different options. The workflow really aids in your ability to automate these. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of A, how to use it, B, ways in which you can employ it to save time. So Brenda, I'm going to hand back over to you. Maybe we've got some questions that I can help answer. And I will turn my camera back on.
Hi, okay, so I couldn't find my control panel. All right, so, okay, this is your last chance to ask questions, Fraser. I think you explained things really well, so we don't actually have a ton of questions. I did get a few people asking about price, and so I'll deal with that in a second, but I'm just trying to get my windows organized here. There we go. Okay, I can see now, sort of.
And I think Brenda mentioned earlier that this is recorded, so if you want to slow down, pause, and work through some of these at a later date, you can do that from the webinar.
Okay, great. So almost there. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to make myself presenter. So for those of you who haven't received who haven't gotten a license yet, you do have to have the V508, version 508, to access the workflow license, and this deck will be sent out to you with these links so you can access them very easily. Quite easy to upgrade. You just need to contact your rep and have them set that up for you. And then once you're on the correct version, or if you're already on the correct version, then you can easily access a workflow license. And I put the little link down here for you as well. And then let me pull up my screen here. So to contact your representative, we don't have the pricing here available in these webinars, but you can easily reach out to your representative. You can go to contact us here, or scroll down the page to the bottom, and you can access your local representative. Mine is Amy Walker because I'm in California. Jania in Germany will have a different person here, and you can just easily send an email to them. Also, while I'm here, I'll just show you, we have a support page where you can access our support team. You can just email support@biopack.com as well. This is once you have the tool in place, then you can ask some questions to the support team. And of course, as Fraser said, come back and watch this webinar whenever you'd like. And you can do that by just clicking on the webinars page. If you're on this webinar, we'll send you a link to the recording so you have access to it, but you can always come back here and see it's right here listed, drag and drop customization for workflow. So those are the resources that I wanted to share with you. Let me just check here and see if, let's see, okay, let's see, there is a question. Let me just look here and see what that is. Nadja, I have one question regarding the scripting license. Is it true that it comes with workflow, or do I have to purchase it individually? Fraser, I'll let you take that one.
Yes, if you have a license for scripting and you have 5.08, you will have both the workflow and the scripting menu appear in AcqKnowledge. So if you look, actually, Brenda, can you
Yes,
share my
I'll make you
screen?
presenter again. Yep, hang on one sec. There you go.
Perfect, thank you. Hopefully it's stuck to the right.
I see.
Perfect.
I see the graph or the.
Yeah. So if you've got scripting, you've got this menu here. If you upgrade to 5.08, you will then have this menu appear here, the workflow menu. So if you have scripting, you will get workflow in essence for free with 5.0.8. And in a lot of instances, it's a free upgrade to 508, or it's a nominal price to upgrade to 508.
Okay, then while you're here, someone asked, you mentioned 3 files as an example. What's the maximum number of files a workflow can open?
You know, in theory, I don't believe there really is a maximum. What I found though, dependent upon the type of analysis you're performing, it just takes a long time to run them all. My preference, one of the things that I didn't show, and if you can bear with me, I can give you an example of how this works, because I didn't show this. I am going to open up a completely different workflow. Yes, I do. Discard. Okay, so this workflow uses a loop, and the reason I like doing these in smaller batches, it's more efficient, and I'll give you an example of how this works really well. So I'm just going to open up this workflow. Should be maybe in here. Here we go. Yep. So this particular workflow is going to identify points within an averaged file. It will take some measurements, and it will perform those measurements on as many files as I open. So I'm just going to run it, and you'll see exactly how this works. So this is participant data. Let's have a look. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to open. See, I'm just using multi-select. I'm using the control key, and I'm just opening 4. Now the system will run through. You can't see this because I've got 2 monitors. It's opening the files on my other monitor, and it's now running through the analysis. And I'll bring the files across when we're done. But the key point will happen once it's finished. All right. This question comes up because I've got a loop in there, and it's asking me, would I like to continue running the workflow? And at this point, I can say, don't continue. I only had 4 files, or I can say continue. Then I can go in and open up another 4 or 10 or however many files. Now, what the system was doing, I'm just going to say don't continue for the purposes of the example. It identified when the stimulus was presented, it identified the maximum response and put an event mark on there. And then if I come into Excel, it gave me the measurements, the time difference between the onset of the stimulus, or the point the stimulus was delivered, and the maximum response for the first and the second. And it did that for each of the 4 files, and it gives me my participant number and everything else. And this was one of the files. Here's the other file, one of the other files. I can grab it, come on. Here we go. The other file just has 1 stimulus. Okay, that was the second spreadsheet. So coming back into the workflow, this loop is conditional. And this is the option here, condition and loop. You just drag this over, and then it gives you options, loop automatically or ask to continue. So there is no upper limit, but if I know if I load this particular workflow with 50 files, it just kind of bulks down. It will do it, it just takes a long time. So my preference is to do it in smaller chunks. So it's a long-winded answer, a long-winded way of saying there is really no upper limitation, but there are practical limitations.
Okay, and then lastly, you can trial this license when you get AcqKnowledge or when you upgrade.
That's
to
correct.
AcqKnowledge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
So if you've just received AcqKnowledge and you didn't order the workflow license or scripting license, you get access to all of the licensed features so that you can play around with them. And if you like what you see, and then you can just add that license in.
Okay, great. All right, so back to my screen. I just have a couple of closing comments. We already did the Q&A. We do live webinars almost every month of the year, so feel free to check out our website and find out when the next one is, or watch any of the webinars on demand. You're more than welcome to do that. And I just want to thank Fraser for all of his work in putting this webinar together. It's a great training for using this tool, and from what I hear from people who are using it, they love it because it just really reduces their workload, makes them way more efficient and productive, and then it makes it more repeatable as well. So all right, well, today's webinar was recorded. We'll send you a link of the recording today and the slides. When you close the webinar window, you'll see a survey. Please complete that so we have your feedback. Also, feel free to visit biopack.com for any additional references, including screencasts and videos on specific features and analysis tools. We do have a whole set of application notes and a knowledge base, and of course, information on upcoming webinars and other in-person events. Fraser, anything else before we conclude?
No, I think that sums it up quite nicely. There is another webinar that we ran on workflow. The first one gives you sort of a higher level view. It kind of shows you the workflows in action. This one, I attempted to break it down a little bit more and provide more of a training vehicle for people. So hopefully between the two, you'll find something that's appropriate for you. So thank you for joining us today. And thanks, Brenda, for hosting.
Of course, and lots of people saying thank you on the webinar, so I see those comments. All right, well, this concludes our webinar. Thank you for attending, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Take care. Goodbye.
Guys, bye.